for Pacifica Radio, October the 17th, 2024. I'm Scott Horton. This is Antiwar Radio. All right, y'all, welcome to the show. It is Antiwar Radio. I'm your host, Scott Horton. I'm editorial director of Antiwar.com and author of the book, Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. You can find my full interview archive, more than 6,000 of them now, going back to 2003, at scotthorton.org and at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show and, you know, Spotify and whatever, all your different podcatchers there. Just look for the Scott Horton Show. And I'm here every Thursday from 2:30 to 3 on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA. And I'm happy to welcome back to the show Max Blumenthal from the Gray Zone. How you doing, Max?
Good to be back.
Good to have you here. And man, you do such important work. And one thing I like about it is, you know, you cover these very controversial topics, but it's always solid stuff. Like if I had to place a bet, I'd bet everything I have that when you do a documentary like Atrocity Inc, how Israel sells its destruction of Gaza, that I just know I can bank on your facts, that you are always so careful and so meticulous and fair-minded in your approach. In the documentary, you say, hey, look, there's no denying what Hamas did here. There is denying what they didn't do. And there goes the rub. And I just appreciate that. It's nice to be able to recommend somebody to somebody and not have to add in a bunch of disclaimers. It doesn't matter that we agree on everything or not. I know I can rely on your journalism, and that's a hell of a lot. And the documentary is Atrocity Inc. It's on YouTube right now. Atrocity Inc, how Israel sells its destruction of Gaza. And man, is this an eye-opening thing. I really recommend it to people to provide real perspective on what's been going on over there for the last year, especially, of course. The propaganda claims, the Belgian babies on bayonets. And I remember even thinking, Max, when the rumors came of all the initial atrocities supposedly perpetrated by Hamas. And this always happens with all the wars. My initial instinct is to say, nah, come on, that's BS. But then I think, oh, wait, I don't know. I don't want to get out ahead of the story. I don't know it's a lie yet. And it could be true. Hamas ain't nice guys. Geez, I don't know. But then, boy, it turned out that the Israelis embellished the story of October the 7th as bad as any war propaganda in the last 100 years. According to your documentary here.
That's right. We're over a year into what clearly appears to be a genocide. I mean, and even if you don't accept that definition, the level of human suffering in Gaza is unparalleled. It's unlike anything I've ever witnessed in my life. So how did we get here? I think that's part of what I'm answering in the film. None of this would have been possible. This level of violence wouldn't have been possible for them to justify it without manipulating Western public opinion through the deployment of atrocity porn that was fabricated through just a cascading series of hoaxes that took what happened on October 7th and exaggerated it to a sublime degree to not only convince Westerners that Israel, whatever it wanted to do, was absolutely necessary, and that it had to act with total ferocity to prevent this from ever happening again, because this was, as the script went, which was repeated by everyone from Biden to Kamala Harris to CNN hosts Jake Tapper, Dana Bash, the worst killing of Jews on any day since the Holocaust. But as something that took place because Hamas wanted to simply kill Jews, and there was no historical context or political context. This didn't happen because Hamas represented a mass-based constituency inside an occupied and besieged enclave of refugees who had no way out and no path forward to ever end their death sentence to just being doomed in a kind of open air prison, which I visited twice. And that is what I try to get to the heart of in this documentary. And so I start just days after October 7th with the first lie about beheaded babies, 40 beheaded babies, which was featured on CNN. They claimed to have confirmed it through Benjamin Netanyahu, as though one of the most mendacious political figures on the world stage can be trusted. Biden repeated it. There were several other fake atrocities cooked up by organizations like Zaka, which was a supposed rescue group that had access to the kibbutzim that were attacked in southern Israel on October 7th. And this organization was raising millions of dollars off of the fake atrocities it concocted, and they were repeated by Secretary of State Tony Blinken to justify his opposition to a ceasefire as late as October 31st, 23, when there should have been a move towards a ceasefire and a hostage deal already because Israel had destroyed northern Gaza. Then we moved to the deception of the death toll, revealing how Israel actually killed many people.
Well, actually, hold that thought for a second. I want to go back to Antony Blinken there because it's Max Blumenthal, you guys, from the Gray Zone, and he's produced this great new documentary, Atrocity Inc. And you show in there multiple clips of Antony Blinken, who's got to be the worst Secretary of State since the last guy.
No, I think he's the worst.
He very well could be. I mean, he's right up there with, McNamara or Condoleezza Rice or the worst, Colin Powell too, the worst killers. But he sat there and told the Congress, he repeated to Congress all of the most lurid stories here that were handed to him by the Israeli government and public relations machine, correct?
Well, he was asked in a Senate hearing on October 31st, do you think that we could move towards a ceasefire? Gaza's being destroyed. U.S. aid is not getting in. Starvation is starting to happen. I mean, it's happening right away, according to Israel's plan. And he said a family was held by Hamas. The father's hand was cut off. The mother was mutilated. Then they killed the child and had breakfast in the lunch in the living room.
Listeners, don't worry. This is all made up, so you don't have to be upset.
This was made up by someone named Yossi Landau from an organization called Zaka, which has raised millions of dollars off fabricated atrocity tales. And he's responsible for at least 10 of the major hoaxes. And so, in my documentary, it's only 40 minutes long. It was, if the entire script had made it across the cutting floor, it would have been an hour and a half because I tried to methodically explain how every lie was debunked and how there was data, forensic evidence that was already documented at the scene of all of these kibbutzim, showing how everyone died and who died. And none of it matched up with anything Blinken, Biden, or any of these other figures said, and yet the lies still persist to this day.
Right. That's such an important point, that the professionals actually doing their job on the scene, they didn't lie. They categorized the deceased, the coroner and his assistants and whoever, all these people. So that's how we know that the rest of this is an embellishment, because it's right here in the real records what really happened, you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, there are many people in Congress who wouldn't have cared if Israel had committed a Holocaust in Gaza without any justification.
That's true.
But they needed a script, and so this allowed them to justify it on the basis of atrocities, and it needs to be prevented.
I think Max, listen, I mean, I don't know if you remember this, but there was a period, this would have been 15 years ago or maybe more, where maybe just after Hamas was when John McCain, I remember him, he's sitting out in the snow being interviewed at the World Economic Forum in Switzerland. And he says, we can talk to Hamas. They're not that bad, really. I mean, they're bad, but we can talk to them. And we're talking about McCain here, right? The worst war hawk in the Republican Party in the U.S. Senate. But he was just, that portrays a different understanding about Hamas. And in fact, I know that I'm going to say, 2013, I think, some al-Qaeda guys popped their heads up in Gaza, and Hamas immediately mutilated them. And so we do not do that. And they had always been denounced The Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas have been denounced by al-Qaeda for playing the game of the West, negotiating, holding elections, and trying to figure out a way to get along instead of just waging jihad and all of that. And so it's really an important distinction and an important part of their propaganda for Netanyahu to say, nope, see, all that's wrong. Hamas is al-Qaeda, is ISIS. And I've had people tell me, yeah, they throw gays off the roof. And I'm like, no, that was Benjamin Netanyahu's agents in Syria that was doing that, not Hamas. And Hamas actually sided with them too. But still, that was ISIS, not Hamas, you know?
Hamas's political wing initially sided with them, their former leadership. The current leadership and their armed wing did not.
Yeah. And they didn't fight with them there.
Side point. Yeah. That's a side point. But
sure.
I mean, October 7th would have never happened if the United States, which actually imposed elections on Palestinians, national elections in 2005 and 6, had accepted the results and said, let's try to deal with the victor of these elections instead of allowing Israel to kidnap all of their legislators in the West Bank where they won, and then place the Gaza Strip under siege after a failed coup attempt led by Elliot Abrams to have the Palestinian Authority reassert control in an area where they were not wanted because they were so corrupt and feckless. And instead, the U.S. supported a siege, declared Hamas a terrorist group on par with al-Qaeda, actually not on par because the U.S. funded and trained al-Qaeda in Syria and Libya. John McCain even went and met with these characters.
Yep.
This would have never happened. October 7th, and this is not what my documentary deals with. My documentary deals with really the role of corporate U.S. media in selling fabricated atrocities, from beheaded babies to mass sexual assault on October 7th, in order to manufacture consent for the genocide that's unfolding right before our eyes. But there's another documentary to be made, and there are several good books out there that there's a book called Containing Hamas, and another book that's a collection, which I blurbed, called Understanding Hamas by Helena Cobbin, that really show that this is a political movement that's not any different from the African National Congress or Irish Republican Army, that has political goals and it uses violence to achieve them when political means and diplomatic means are cut off because the West refuses to deal with them. And the West basically means the U.S.
Yeah.
So October 7th was just an attempt to force a political negotiation so that Hamas could get its people, its prisoners out, and to start to force an end to the siege policy. And Yahya Sinwar, the man who was just apparently killed today by Israel in a massive strike in southern Gaza, who was the mastermind of October 7th and the entire, with the objective of forcing this negotiation. He himself negotiated his own release out of prison through the Gilad Shalit prisoner swap in 2011. He'd been in prison for 25 years. And he's someone who understands Gaza society, the society in Gaza, and what it's like to be a refugee. He grew up in the poorest part of Gaza in the Shati refugee camp. And he also understood Israeli society intimately, taught himself Hebrew at a fluent level in prison, and became the key negotiator from prison for Hamas. When he was released, he duped the Israelis into believing that he wanted just accommodation, get some work permits, and get his people. I guess they never read the novel he smuggled out of prison. They were convinced that they could domesticate Hamas, and that, if they sent some money from Qatar into Gaza to just keep the lights on, that they would accept life under siege, and gradually the Palestinian struggle would be diminished. Meanwhile, Sinwar was preparing a major operation, and there were a few things that went awry, like whatever happened at the music festival on Gaza's border, which in itself was a perverse display of colonial entitlement, in which it appears over 200 people were killed. But as I show in the documentary, many of them were killed by Israeli Apache helicopters and drones as they were taken as captive back into Gaza. And people were just shot randomly on the ground trying to escape because the helicopter pilots couldn't distinguish between Palestinians and Israelis and didn't.
Hey guys, I've had a lot of great webmasters over the years, but the team at expanddesigns.com have by far been the most competent and reliable. Harley Abbott and his team have made great sites for the show and the Institute, and they keep them running well, suggesting and making improvements all along. Make a deal with expanddesigns.com for your new business or news site. They will take care of you. Use the promo code SCOTT and save $500. That's expanddesigns.com. Man, I wish I was in school so I could drop out and sign up for Tom Woods' Liberty Classroom instead. Tom has done such a great job on putting together a classical curriculum for everyone from junior high schoolers on up through the postgraduate level. And it's all very reasonably priced. Just make sure you click through from the link in the right margin at scotthorton.org. Tom Woods' Liberty Classroom. Real history, real economics, real education.
Well, I guess it was just a matter of time. I drank so much coffee I turned into some. Hey guys, check out the Scott Horton Show special blend at MoondosArtisanCoffee.com. It's a blend of organically grown Ethiopian and Sumatran coffee beans. Two very different coffees combined to create a unique blend. Ethiopia is smooth and medium-bodied. Sumatra, rich, heavy-bodied coffee. And it's got caffeine, lots of it, which is good for if you have to drive drunk or get up in the morning. Click through from the link in the right-hand margin at scotthorton.org to save 10% on your order. It's the Scott Horton Show blend from Mundo's Artisan Coffee. Hey, you guys, coming up this October 7th through the 11th, join Mikkel Thorup, host of the Expat Money Podcast, the heroic Ron Paul, the great Tom Woods, Doug Casey, Mark Faber, Tom Luongo, myself, and many other great speakers for the online Expat Money Summit 2024. My presentation will be on the subject of my new book, Provoked: How Washington Started the New Cold War with Russia and the Catastrophe in Ukraine, which is not quite out yet. And learn how you can reclaim your freedom by moving abroad, legally reduce your tax bill, and protect your assets. More than 8,000 people attended last year, and it's free. My guys Kyle Anzalone and Dave DeCamp from the Institute and Antiwar.com will be joining a panel discussion as well. Just go to 2024.expatmoneysummit.com for all the info. That's 2024.expatmoneysummit.com. So it's Anti-War Radio on KPFK. I'm Scott Horton talking with Max Blumenthal here, and this is where we get back to all the atrocity porn that was blamed on Hamas. Part of that was they had to explain the crime scene of just ultra violence, and they had to blame it all on Hamas. And so you had entire houses blown up, bodies burned beyond recognition in various circumstances. And if Hamas did that all, then boy, that does look like some ISIS-type behavior, Max. But here's where we get back to what you were saying before about the Hannibal Directive. What is the Hannibal Directive?
Well, used to be a secret Israeli military policy that allowed Israel to kill its own citizens if they were taken captive by the enemy, to deny the enemy
didn't it
political
start out
leverage.
that it was only for soldiers? If a soldier like Gilad Shalit got kidnapped,
right?
But then
It
they
was
just
for
on the
soldiers.
fly they applied it to civilians too.
Well, this was the first time that there had been a kind of mass kidnapping, and many soldiers were being taken captive from their bases. So they enacted a mass Hannibal, and the order went out: no car should return to Gaza, blow up everything on its way to Gaza, kill everyone. And look at the methods Israel's using now in Gaza. Well, they'll just blow up entire neighborhoods and apartment blocks filled with people, filled with children, to get one target, or they're just doing it randomly. We can't really tell. The violence is so extreme. They're doing it in southern Lebanon as well. They just blew up an entire village, which dates back 2,000 years in southern Lebanon. They were doing this on October 7th in the southern Israeli so-called Gaza envelope to their own citizens, including with tank shells. You had tanks operating inside kibbutzim, like Kibbutz Be'eri, blowing up homes. We know for a fact that at least one home was ordered to be shelled with at least 12 Jewish Israelis who were being held by a team of Hamas militants, and they killed everyone inside, including 12-year-old twins, then blamed it all on Hamas. But you had tank shells going into many other homes, helicopters firing their cannons and rockets into homes, drones. And then, you look at the homes and the state of them, they look like the homes in Gaza. And people inside were found with their body parts severed, shredded up. And then they would say, oh, Hamas just went in and shredded these people just for fun. When the reality was Hamas wanted to get as many people back to Gaza alive as possible, and that they have done all they could to keep these captives and hostages alive so that they can use them as political collateral. Meanwhile, since October 7th, in Gaza, where over 250 people had been taken captive in what was a very successful, probably the most successful Palestinian military operation in history, Israel has killed over 40 hostages. It continues to enact the Hannibal Directive. Everyone who's come out of Gaza who's Israeli has said, my biggest fear was getting killed in an Israeli airstrike, and so many of them have. Israel also killed three of its own citizens almost at point blank range, execution style, when they ran out with a sign reading "Rescue Us" to a team of Israeli soldiers. Right. Because the soldiers are basically told, kill everything that moves. Right. That's why the New York Times released an investigation this week showing the x-rays of children's skulls in Gaza with bullets wedged inside their skulls because snipers are shooting children, anyone who walks down the street. So this is what happened on October 7th. And this is what manufactured consent for what I consider to be the Holocaust of our time.
Yeah. Max, I think the only other side of the story is it just couldn't be. You're telling me that these are our friends? This is what we're paying for? Is a genocide based on pure lies in the most cynical, make George Bush look like a hero type fashion?
I mean, this is the worst scandal I've ever witnessed. And it's almost undeniable at this point what's taking place. But now you even have Pentagon Chief Lloyd Austin and Tony Blinken admitting that Israel is deliberately starving the population in Gaza, issuing a letter to Israel's Defense Secretary, Yoav Gallant, declaring that if Israel continues obstructing U.S. humanitarian aid in Gaza, that they will cut off arms. Of course, they'll never cut off arms. And they say they'll do so in 30 days, and they waited until now because in 30 days it will be about a week after Election Day. So it's safe to do something. Mm-hmm. But there's an acknowledgement there that Israel is breaking U.S. law by refusing to allow U.S. aid into Gaza because its goal is not to end Hamas. It is to end the Palestinian question, as it always has been since 1948.
Yeah. And now this is the point of this documentary. It's called Atrocity Inc. Everyone can watch it for free on YouTube. And it's about American media repetition of Israeli propaganda to justify all this. And it's so important because I know, even as we're talking, people driving down the 405 are thinking, yeah, but what about all of that stuff I heard, Max? Like, for example, there's this lady, Sheryl Sandberg, and this guy, Jeffrey Gettleman, who put all this effort into exposing Hamas's mass rape campaign on October the 7th last year. What about that?
Yeah, I mean, I go into that at length in this film, and in the original script, I would have demolished these propaganda pieces even more thoroughly, but we had to make this watchable, not send people down the rabbit hole that I was in for months, debunking these bogus documentaries and articles, which were spinning out a propaganda construct that was conceived in Israel, in Tel Aviv, after all of the other hoaxes had been exposed and after the first exchange of hostages and prisoners in early December, which is that Hamas carried out mass sexual violence on October 7th. I just knew this was false because I know I know the mentality of the Hamas fighter and the organization. And if someone had been caught doing that and violating religious and cultural custom in Gaza, they actually would have been executed by Hamas leadership. It would have violated the mission, and it would have been actually sort of physically impossible under Israeli fire. So I immediately called out this lie, but then I set out to debunk all the sources in the major New York Times front page article. It then started to collapse when members of the families, bereaved family members of people who were killed on October 7th, started claiming the New York Times had lied about their own family members being raped. So Sheryl Sandberg, billionaire, neoliberal tech oligarch, friend of Hillary Clinton, comes forward with a documentary taking the New York Times and all of these articles, which were the result of the Israeli propaganda construct claiming mass rape took place on October 7th. She sort of dramatized it through interviews with sources who had already been debunked. And she violated the Geneva Conventions by featuring testimony by Palestinian prisoners in Israeli torture camps whose testimony had been coerced, obviously through torture, through threats against their families, who claimed that they raped women on October 7th. And, separately at the Gray Zone, we investigated these testimonies and tried to match them against physical evidence, video evidence, forensic evidence of what took place on October 7th, because there is meticulous documentation. And we could not match any of these confessions with any real events that took place. So obviously, they were the product of torture. I mean, what Israel's Shin Bet will do is they'll tell these Palestinian guys, like, here's your family's home. Here are the coordinates. We're going to kill your entire family unless you start talking.
And it's a credible threat, too. They kill families all day.
All day. If you belong to Hamas, or if someone in your family had been involved in resistance activities, you will be eliminated, because they believe that the family itself poses a threat, because they can have children who will then resist them, and that they need to send a message to the population at large that you will be killed if you do anything. So Sheryl Sandberg violated, I think, one of the most important red lines in journalism, which is you don't use coerced testimony, testimony that was coerced through torture, at least without verifying it. So we feature that as well. And I think what Atrocity Inc does is it provides people with a vehicle, not just for understanding how this massive propaganda apparatus manufactured consent for the worst genocide we've witnessed in recent years, or in my lifetime, but also gives you an educational tool to share with others. You can show it in your school. You can show it in your community. Have a small meeting with friends and people who are on the fence and start a discussion about it. It's only 40 minutes long. And I think, we did it in a pretty compelling fashion.
Yeah. Hey, I sent it out to some conservative-leaning friends of mine and just said, hey, blow your mind. Check this out. Because I know that they don't know, but you do such a great job of presenting your evidence in this documentary. It is incredible, and it should be viral. It's the kind of thing that people can know that they can stand on to show their friends and their family that, listen, you don't have to believe these lies. There's no reason any of us should have to be bound to support evil based on deception. Forget it. Break free of that. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
And here's such a great tool to show your friends and families. So thank you so much for your effort here and all your great work at the Gray Zone and your time on the show, Max.
Thanks a lot, Scott, and congratulations on the new book.
I appreciate it. Soon. All right, you guys, that's the great Max Blumenthal. Speaking of books, he wrote Goliath, The 51-Day War, and The Management of Savagery, which are all fantastic. And again, this documentary is called Atrocity Inc, How Israel Sells Its Destruction of Gaza. And that's it for Antiwar Radio for this week. I'm Scott Horton. I'm here every Thursday from 2:30 to 3 on KPFK. 90.7 FM in LA. See you next week.